Hey everybody, how's it going? Welcome back to the Criterion Collection Review Series, where we're on our second part of the Three Colors Trilogy, where today we're going to be looking at the second film in the trilogy, obviously, which is White. So White is interesting, especially when contrasted with Blue, where, as we previously discussed, Blue is a very somber film, it's a very complex film, very poetic, very visual rather than dialogue heavy, not a straightforward movie. White could not be the more opposite at times. It is more of a straightforward film. It has a very clear plot, an antagonist, a goal. At times it's more similar to a comedy, a dark comedy, but still some very comedic moments. It follows a primarily male character than anything else. And despite these more conventional and different approaches to the film, it still has that Kieslowski style, that poeticism, that eye for imagery and for subtle elements that make the movie work a lot more than I think it would have in many other directors' hands. But to get into the plot, the story follows the main character's name is Karol Karol, played by, and I'm going to mess up his name, I know it, Zbigniew Zamachowski. I hope I said that right. I'm terrible with Polish names. But he is a Polish man who is getting a divorce, or is getting divorced from his wife, played by Julie Delpy, who is a French woman. And sort of in the court session, she admits that the reason the marriage is being broken off is because Karol has not been able to consummate their marriage since their wedding day. Essentially stating that he cannot get an erection around her. And so the divorce goes through. She essentially publicly humiliates him. He tries to confront her at the hair salon that they own, and she threatens to call the police on him and almost frames him for attempting to burn down the salon, even though she's the one that started the fire. Takes his home, takes his money, leaves him on the street penniless. So he's been totally emasculated, totally just lost, totally just gone. And his only solution is to return back to Poland, the only way to get there is, well, he has to be carried in another person's luggage, and then he's stolen by a group of thieves in Poland trying to find some belongings. They beat him up, and he sort of that's his introduction to his new country. Which it sort of implied he hasn't been back since the fall of the communist regime, and is just starting to realize how much Europe has impacted his home country. But from there, Karol devises a plan to sort of get revenge on his ex-wife through sort of becoming more successful than her, finding a way to make a lot of money, to sort of take control of the lawless capitalism existing in Poland, and then eventually forming a plan to get back at her and sort of affect her in the same way that she affected him. And with that setup, White sounds almost very basic, very straightforward. It sounds like something that could be an easier film to understand, and I think in a lot of ways it is. But on top of the film being more straightforward, that also means that the characters seem to have more potent and readable personalities. Like, you have the guy that actually brings Karol to Poland, who wants to commit suicide, even though he has a wife and a family and a successful life. You have Karol's brother, who's a very flamboyant guy that's been running the salon since Karol's absence. You have the guy that owns a farm that Karol has to make a deal with in order to buy the land and eventually sell it to a different landowner to begin his fortune. Just these little moments that really stick out in the wider narrative. And I mentioned earlier that the film is more of a comedy, and well, it's more of a dark comedy. There is the moment where he does get beaten up by the thieves that find him in the suitcase, and that's a funny moment. It's a kind of a dark and sad moment, but there's a tinge of humor to it too, of just how low this guy can go, how he just cannot catch a break to save his life. There are some more conventionally funny moments, some more just funny things here and there, There's a really funny scene where Karol is hired to like protect a money laundering business, I guess, and he's given a gun. He doesn't know how to hold it, so he's just trying to like figure out how to hold it, and it's very silent comedy-esque. And even on the special features, the actor talks about how Kieslowski wanted him to evoke Charlie Chaplin in that moment, which he really does in his mannerisms and way of moving and reacting to things, and it's very effective. It's very funny. But then I think, you know, there are these straightforward elements that make it a conventional film, but Kieslowski can't help but bring in some more beautiful, poetic, visually striking moments. There's a lot of doubles, a lot of repeating images, a lot of motifs. There are things carried over from Blue, like there's the woman that's trying to put a bottle in a recycling bin, which in the first movie is a long sequence where we watch her slowly walk over to the bin, put the bottle in, whatever. And then here, Karol is just by the woman as she's doing it, almost like a comparison to his life in a weird way. It's very interesting. There's also the use of color. Blue is a bluish film, and the blue is used as almost like a way to haunt Juliette Binoche's character, while in white, it's permeating in every essence of the film. It heightens the coldness of Poland and maybe even of Karol's character. It's just a very striking use of it. There are even these very interesting flashback sequences to the wedding day that are bathed in this strong white light that give that you know, you see Julie Depley in the veil and in her wedding dress, and she seems almost ghostly. It's almost like an apparition. It's very odd, very interesting. But on top of that, Poland itself is kind of a character. I think there's a lot to say about this film, taking place in Poland, which is Kieslowski's home country, and following it directly after the fall of the communist regime and seeing what kind of place it's turned into, where it's a weird hodgepodge of lawlessness, of people trying to figure out their own ways and methods of doing things in this new world. It can be a little run down. There are large piles of garbage everywhere. It can be dirty. It can be, you know, unseemly, especially in comparison to Paris in the beginning of the film. And yet there is a beauty to it. There is some sort of reverence for it. And, you know, while it is still trying to figure out the capitalist democratic system that's been forced upon them, that does mean there are a lot of opportunities for people to get ahead and to take advantage of certain situations, just like Karol is doing. You know, I feel like Karol's own character arc maybe reflects Poland at this time. Now, I am no historian. I don't know a lot about Poland's transition from communism to democracy in the 90s, but it feels to me as if, you know, Poland at the beginning of this film begins in the same way that Karol does, at the bottom. I mean, literally, when he finally arrives in Poland and is pushed down a hill after being beamed up, he says, "Oh, I finally returned home," and the shot we are given is of like a trash pile, you know, in the middle of a frozen wasteland. But yet, as Karol gets more successful, of making more money, of investing it, of starting a business, we see a more bohemian, a more commercial side of Poland that looks similar, more similar to an American or European city, with skyscrapers, you know, compact neighborhoods, things like that. It's an interesting arc that you see through Karol and also through Poland, of seeing the different sides of this country on the verge of democracy. On top of the other visually striking elements, the actors are also really great in the film. The actor that plays Karol does a really great job of, in the beginning, coming off very meek, very weak, emasculated, obviously. But then as the film goes on, he gains more confidence. He becomes a higher or a larger presence in Poland, I guess, or he gains some more success and wealth. He does begin to appear more confident, more sure of himself, and he really plays both sides very well, surprisingly. Julie Depley does a great job of being completely unlikable in the beginning, and you know, you kind of she has this sort of unearthly beauty. It's hard to describe just the way she's shot. She seems flawless and perfect, and it, you know, it kind of she has this line where she asks Karol in the beginning if he's scared of her, and you can kind of see why he would feel that way. You know, it's just interesting, that little touch. But this gets into the last third of the film, I guess, where Karol's plan really starts to come to fruition, which, if you don't want spoilers, now's your time to leave. But I think his plan would not work in a movie today, and I'm not even sure if it works here, even though I think it does bring up an interesting point. I think it does go a little bit too far and doesn't always work and always rubs me the wrong way, I'll say. So the color white on the French flag represents equality or equity. And so it seems that the way Kieslowski has taken that meaning and has found a way to sort of warp it in the same way he did with blue is to take that equality to the furthest extreme, where Julie Depley's character, the ex-wife, her plan or just her actions left Karol homeless, penniless, forced to return to his country, emasculated sexually, just all of that, right? So Karol decides his revenge is for dominance, not necessarily to give her the same punishment or an equal punishment, but to take it a step further. So his plan is to fake his own death. His plan is to have her come to the funeral, to express some grief, some loss, some regret. He then appears in her hotel room at night, seduces her, has sex with her, brings her to orgasm, and then leaves the next day, blames her for an international crime, and forces her in jail in Poland, which for me doesn't stick well with me, because it feels like the focus is on the sexual domination of another person, which that sort of mentality really bothers me. I like to think that by the end of the film, the point is that that's kind of gross and kind of, this new democratic capitalist Poland has warped Karol to the point where he is so uncaring and so unfeeling. And it just feels very weird to me, where Julie Depley does a very terrible thing. I don't know if she's necessarily a bad person, it's hard to tell because she is so underdeveloped in the film. Where she is just, let's face it, she's just a bitch at the beginning. She is just a one note, doesn't like Karol, hates him, hates Poland, kicks him to the curb, does a really awful thing. And so when Karol gets that revenge, it just feels very odd. It feels very one note. It just feels, I think, and I just think it really is the sexual nature of it. I think it is that very creepy and very juvenile, desire to sexually dominate your partner, specifically men dominating women, and seeing that as a form of revenge, as a way of getting back at them, almost like, oh, you don't think I can have sex with you? Well, here, I'm gonna make you orgasm. And it's just really rubs me the wrong way. In the final moment of the film, Julie Depley is in prison, and Karol goes to visit her, but they are sort of, he's outside, she's inside, he's on the ground, she's up high, and they look through the window at each other, and she says in like sign language, I believe what she says is something akin to like, we will be together once I'm out of here. She is again fallen in love with him due to the orgasm, most likely. And Karol removes the binoculars he has and is crying due to it. And I think there is a message here, possibly, of criticizing the way that the capitalist mindset has affected Europe and European peoples, or Polish people specifically. In the sense that it has taken these people and given them a very cutthroat, merciless mentality, where their goals in life are to be better than other people and to dominate other people. But then once they have fulfilled this desire, once Karol has gotten his revenge, so to speak, he isn't better for it because he realizes he still misses her. He still wants to be with her, despite doing this horrible thing to her. And I guess at the end of the day, it just bothers me. She still wants to be with him. And I think it just doesn't sit right with me. There might be an argument to be made that it is a symbolic moment. It is a metaphorical moment. Therefore, should not be taken seriously in reality. But due to the subtle nature of Kieslowski's films, which I think White ends up being, it's difficult for me to pick one side over the other, to determine that the film is doing one thing more than the other. I think it might be a little bit more complex than that. It's not as black and white, and it does lead to some interesting discussions. But because of that, and because of the more straightforward nature of the film, it makes it difficult for me to really love this movie. I think it is an extremely well-made movie, a well-acted movie, and is made more interesting in the context of the other films. But I think overall it is somewhat misguided, and I think is a film that starts out very fun, that starts out very interesting, and then kind of loses itself in the end and turns into something that really does not sit well with me and is kind of gross at times. Now, even though I think white is maybe not as good as blue and red, it is still worth having in this collection because of the special features that are included in the release. Once again, there is a video essay analyzing the film and its connections and motifs, which is really interesting. A lot of great interviews. There's a lot of interviews with the actors, with Kieslowski himself, looking back at the film and what it meant and its sort of context within the trilogy and within Kieslowski's career. Once again, 2 of his short films and documentaries are on here. There's a really interesting special feature with Kieslowski himself giving a sort of little masterclass lesson on editing and how they sort of created the intro to the film. It's really, really fascinating to see his thought process, where the film was supposed to start one way, and then by making a not bold, but just an interesting creative choice, completely changes the way it's read and the way it engages the viewer, and it's very fascinating. There also is the essay included here, which is written by, I'm sure I get the name right, an essay here written by Stuart Klawans, I hope I said his name right, where it looks at how the film is subtly and quietly political, sort of similar to how I discussed its relation to Poland and capitalism. That seems to be something that this writer is getting at. At the end, it kind of rubs me the wrong way in the sense that it discusses that sexual domination that I talked about and sort of sees it in a positive light, which is like a little not great. But it is still worth a read, and it's great to include on this release. I will end this by saying that I do believe white is most people's least favorite in the collection. It is the most different. Of course, the 2 other films have female protagonists. This one has a male protagonist. They're more abstract. They're more, artsy. This one is more straightforward. But I think on its own, it would be a very interesting and highly regarded film. And I also think that the movie gains more interest and more intrigue by being in the trilogy, by being within the context of the other films. And if you buy the box set, it won't be a waste of your time. Either way, thank you all so much for watching. Please subscribe if you want to see when the next review comes out for Red. If you like this review, please like it. And if you want more people to see this video, please share it around. But either way, I'll see y'all next time, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.